probably don't know, but you're about to be involved in an elaborate experiment. That's not about kind of putting electrodes to your genitals or anything like that, not that kind of experiment. It is I'm part of a process that I'm working on with the Wheeler Centre. The Wheeler Centre is a centre for writers and thinkers in Melbourne, and we're roaming Australia collecting the nation's most urgent questions and thrashing them out with some of the sharpest and most important thinkers we know. What are the most important questions facing Australia today and in the future? We're doing it in panel discussions. This is our first one, so that's why I said you were involved in an elaborate experiment. You're the first, then we go to Brisbane Writers Festival, then to Darwin, then to the National Young Writers Festival in Newcastle, and this will culminate in an event in Melbourne on Sunday the 15th of October, where all the questions, all the feedback and all the talks that have happened at all those festivals will be brought together. In these sessions, we're going to try and wrestle with the big questions facing this nation. So think culture, class and climate, politics and punditry, race and racism, philosophy and feminism. What are the issues that divide and unite us? Do terms like right-wing or left-wing still mean anything today? And is the world changing too fast or not fast enough? So, what the format of today is going to be is I'm going to introduce, we've got 4 speakers, and they're each going to talk a little bit about what they think are some of their urgent questions for the nation. After that, we're going to be doing a little poll. We've got some questions that we've developed, and so we've asked people to download an app on their phone if they've got one called Slido, or we're just going to do that old-fashioned thing of putting your hand up. So it's an opportunity for you to make your thoughts heard on a range of questions, and there's lots of opportunity for questions from the audience for our panel as well. Before I bring our panel on, I was asked by the Wheeler Centre, we thought it would be useful before every session, given we're in particular places in Australia, to reflect on the place that we're in. I haven't been to Perth for a couple of years. It's still a beautiful city, still vibrant. I've noticed an increasing number of homeless people on the street, and you may or may not know that's happening in every single capital city in Australia, as well as in some regional centres. But Perth is got its own unique aspects, some of which you may know about and some of which you may not. Perth has more cars or road space per capita than any place on earth. So you'd know it's also one of the most geographically dispersed cities in the world. That combination between geographically dispersed and cars and road space has probably got something to do with each other. You'd be lucky to know you're actually a pretty good bike-friendly city, but it could be better. Perth is closer to Jakarta than it is to Canberra. Some people might think that that's a good thing rather than a bad thing. You might think that you're the most isolated capital city in the world, but you're actually not. Honolulu is the first and Perth is the second. When thinking about the proximity of Perth to Jakarta rather than Canberra, I decided to go onto the ABS census site to see what the typical Western Australian is. The problem is, and one of the things I write about a lot in my work, is no such thing as the typical Australian. In fact, the concept of the typical Australian is very problematic because according to the census, the typical Western Australian is a man who's 37 years old, born in Australia with English parents, married, with 2 children and 2 cars. Does anybody fit that description here? No. So we can just kind of toss out the ABS's view of what a typical Western Australian is, because we're not, even though we're trying to talk about some questions and issues that might unite us as a nation, we're also interested in questioning how those kinds of issues and questions might play out with different groups in the community. One of the things that's always fascinated me, though, about Western Australia is its reluctance to see itself as part of the rest of the nation. Donald Horne wrote in 1964, that Western Australians did not want to join Australia at the time of Federation, but was forced to by migrant gold miners. So it seems that gold miners have been calling the shots in Western Australia for some time, but potentially not migrants. This is the reason why you are not mentioned in the preamble to the Constitution. You should read the Constitution, not if you just want to go into Parliament. It's probably a good idea to read the Constitution if you want to go into Parliament. You'd be probably better off than some people in the current Australian Senate. Anyway, so that's my preamble. That's where we are. You know we are. We're in Perth in Western Australia, and I really want to welcome our panellists to the stage. I'm going to call them up one by one, and the first is going to be Zoe Coombs Marr, writer, comedian, artist and performer. Welcome, Zoe. Next, Nayuka Gorrie. Nayuka is a writer, an activist, a facilitator and consultant, and a young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander woman. Welcome, Nayuka. Next, Brad Ness, a Western Australian, Paralympian, a wheelchair basketball legend. He was the Australian flag bearer at the opening ceremony of the 2016 Rio Paralympics. Welcome, Brett. Oh, there you are, Brett. And finally, last but not least, Sisonke Msimang, originally from South Africa and now living in WA. She is responsible for the oral storytelling program at the Centre of Stories. She's done a TED Talk on storytelling and has written for the New York Times, The Guardian, Newsweek, Al Jazeera. Wow, what a combination. Welcome, Sisonke. Right, so what we're going to do is we've asked each of the panellists to really think about what are the questions that they think Australia, the Australian community and us as a nation need to consider at this point in time. And so I want to invite Sisonke first to, I've sprung this on her a bit, but she looks just in the wings. I'm so mean, but you look like you can cope with anything, frankly. Sisonke, over to you. You can stand if you'd like to go to the podium. That would be great.
So, hi everyone. As you know, I've been sprung with this. So let me start with a mea culpa. I have only been living in Australia for 3 years, so I'm probably the least qualified of all of you to say anything about questions for the nation. I came to Australia in December 2014 because 15 years ago I met this guy and he was really handsome, and then I got knocked up, and then we had kids. And then one day he woke up 15 years later and was like, I want to go home, as people tend to want to do. And so here we are. So I speak as an outsider, and in some ways as an observer, but of course one who is implicated in many ways in the issues about which we speak today, in part because my children are Australian and because I am trying to make a home here. So of course, as a South African, as a Black South African, I want to talk about forgiveness and reconciliation, because the gift South Africa has given to the world is Nelson Mandela. And so I think it is timely to talk about Nelson Mandela and his legacy and reconciliation and forgiveness in light of talks of recognition and of treaties and so on and so forth in this country at this moment. So everybody loved Mandela, the saint, the teddy bear of the world, the grandfather we all wished we had. But few people want to talk about the dark side of his legacy, which is about the orthodoxy of forgiveness and reconciliation, and how stifling and unhealthy it can be to be told that you will forgive on a time frame. So when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission began after apartheid ended, it was set up for a 5-year time period. And so this was this wonderful process that was heralded around the world, where Black and white South Africans were going to come together and chart a future together. And what would happen would be that Black people would forgive and white people would say sorry, and we would go into the glorious future. And of course, that meant that white people's consciences would be wiped clean through that process, right? And so for many Black South Africans, I think what the TRC did and what having a truncated process of forgiveness meant what it resulted in, I think, is a lot of bitterness and a lot of ways in which grief and the kind of rambling nature of life in which you forgive how and when you choose, if you do, hasn't been allowed to happen. So my question for this nation, for Australia, is what happens to Australia if some Aboriginal people aren't prepared to forgive and reconcile? Will white people die? Will they crumble? Will they melt? Or will their egos be bruised? Maybe. And perhaps then, we, and I put myself in whiteness for a second here, will have to work harder and perhaps develop some deeper structural responses. In other words, I think that the talk about reconciliation and forgiveness in a country like Australia is often a cop-out and a trap. And it seems to me, since coming here, that when you mention the R word, the racism word, white people get very upset. If you say to them that they're racist or that they may have benefited from racism, it's like the sky is falling down. And it's just a word. And of course it has a meaning, a powerful meaning. But if you can't take that on, then it seems to me that the people who are brave enough to use that word, their pain and their hurt and their suffering is what melts away. And instead it's your own ego and your own feelings and your own bruisedness that comes to the fore. So I know all too well, as a Black South African who's lived through the notion of the Rainbow Nation, that questions about moving forward and shaping the future are often predicated on this idea of forgiveness. And the assumption is that those who have been historically wronged will have grace, and that grace will deliver the nation into this new state of innocence. So think, if you will, about the death of that beautiful and loved 14-year-old boy that everybody is talking about, and the response to it by well-meaning white people whom I've been speaking to in the last week, who argue it's complicated. It's like the uproar about Adam Goodes doing a dance of celebration, a 6 seconds that, throws the nation into turmoil, or the trauma around Dylan Voller and the death in custody of Ms. Dew here in the state. All of these are symptoms of a society that wants to erase and to deny Aboriginal people. And so I am constantly reminded here in Perth that I am a privileged stranger in this land. I was not invited here, right? My husband invited me, but who is he to invite me, given the history of this place? So I'm a settler, a beneficiary of a horrible set of crimes that have not been adequately acknowledged. And I may have more melanin than other settlers, but I am not innocent. And so I want to have this conversation in a way that doesn't blame only, but that also takes responsibility for what it means to be someone of privilege. Because we know how racism works, that it exceptionalizes some and it creates these hierarchies. And so I'm one of those better blacks, the hardworking blacks who come from far and are educated and make a way. But I have learned in the last few years that there is no one lower in this society than an Aboriginal person, and particularly an Aboriginal woman. So people find it easy to talk to me as a certain type of black person and to say the most horrible things about Aboriginal people. And so it leaves me often wondering, what is my responsibility? As an uninvited guest, as a person who has benefited from the exploitation of this land, from the killing of people, from the establishment of a state that gains legitimacy from theft, the question I think facing all Australians who come here uninvited is, why are we so afraid? Why are we so scared of Aboriginal people's anger? Why do we look down on it, deride it, ignore it, become impatient with it? And what does it mean for the future of this country if we continue like this? What might it look like if we let that anger be? If we listen and accept and work harder to build a future not based on saying, no, but if we instead insist on saying, yes, you're right. And I'll stop there.
Before I invite the next guest on, I just wanted to ask you, Sisonke, you kind of start by saying, oh, I've only been here for a couple of years, so I don't feel I can make a comment, which is something that happens a lot to, most people who come here from another country. Isn't that itself a big problem? That from our point of view, from the culture's point of view, that we can't accept the critique of people who come elsewhere. from another country? Isn't it the outsider, the thoughtful outsider, who's actually probably best at working out what isn't working in our society?
Yes and no. I think the yes part is, of course, when you're an outsider who's thinking about a place and observing it anew, you bring a certain perspective that can be useful. I think the no is that it also is very easy to talk about Australia as it is to talk about South Africa, as it is to talk about Canada or America, these big white settler societies, in broad brushstrokes. So the daily experience of living here has provided me with much more nuance about who Australians are and how deeply multicultural this society is than I would have had before actually living here. So it is easy to reach conclusions and to say, that this is what the national conversation looks like. It is a far more obviously racist place than many other societies that I've lived in. But that's in part because I think of a fear of talking. And I say that because I actually often say to my husband, but that's racist, you're a racist. And so when I say it's not a big deal, he goes, are you going to die because I said, you're a racist? Babes, that's racist. Stop it. My children are very good. No, that's racist, mommy. Right? So I think disabusing ourselves of this notion that like this R word is so horrible as this boogeyman, because I think the fear is once you admit it, then what are you admitting to? All the history comes back. All the terrible, terrible things come and eat us up. And I think that being able to say that and to live with the complexity of that is absolutely fundamental for an honest conversation, particularly one that puts Aboriginal people at the center of what needs to get finished in this country. Because if you don't do that, this history will continue to haunt this nation.
Our next speaker is going to be Zoe Coombs Marr from New South Wales. We've both flown over from Sydney. A writer, a comedian, an artist and performer. You may know Zoe from her award-winning show, Trigger Warning. Is there a trigger warning in what you're about to say? Do we have to give people a trigger warning?
Probably, but there isn't one.
Okay. And we welcome her to the podium to deliver her question for the nation.
Hi guys, hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. My question for the nation is, are you really that important? Probably not. I'm going to talk about that, about how I'm going to talk a bit about discomfort, how we're all wusses, and then I'm going to close on cows. You're a great crowd. So now we live in a culture that likes to define itself by progress, the belief in the individual and the pursuit of success. At the same time, our decisions are made generally, not really on any kind of boundary pushing or challenge, but on what is placed in front of us and on what we're told to value: house, marriage, kids, etc. Now, I know I'm starting to sound a bit like a prepared speech at a Year 9 at Stedford, but I had to start somewhere, and at least it wasn't. The Oxford English Dictionary defines progress as... Great crowd. So I did a stand-up gig last night. I feel like I'm still in that mode. Anyone from out of town? We're at an extraordinary time, I think, internationally and nationally. We're seeing a new wave of feminism, marriage equality in most of the civilised world. We're seeing incredible Black Lives movements and a veritable revolution in gender and the transgender movement there. There are amazing people doing amazing things in changing our perceptions and our perspectives. But I don't think we're all pulling our weight, to be honest. To me, there seems to be a gap between what we say we believe in, the things that we click on, and what we do in our everyday lives, the decisions that we make, the decisions that we make that are not necessarily based on empathy or responsibility, but rather on comfort and ease. Now, that's a very human thing, to make our decisions on our desires and ego. And I know about ego because I'm a comedian and I spend most nights standing on stage asking people to love me. Now, as a female comedian, I often get asked the question, as a female comedian, what's it like being a woman in comedy? And now I can talk about gender and feminism until the cows come home. I will get to the cows later. But it does get boring. And I never really know quite how to answer it. Like, what's it like being a woman in comedy as opposed to what? When I was a chihuahua in comedy. Now, it annoys me that only women get asked these questions. Men are never asked about how their gender affects them in comedy or in most other places. It's never the people with the privilege who are asked to do the work to explain it. And I wish that men would talk about gender more. Why is it always up to me? Now, this annoyed me for a really long time before I realised that I was actually doing the exact same thing as those guys. So now I answer the question, as a female comedian, with, well, as a white comedian, my race has had absolutely no effect on my career and in fact has benefited me in countless ways. And I find that makes for a much more interesting interview. Now, let's share the emotional labour around, because it's precisely the people in positions of privilege who can and should be acting for change. I wish that men would talk about gender more. I'm extremely grateful when they do. And it's the same way I love it when straight people talk about queer rights. I'm a lesbian, by the way. Sorry, ladies. It's a slow burn, that one. That's a slow burn. So I love it when straight people get involved in queer rights, and I love it when they really put their money where their mouth is and refuse to get married at the moment. Now, I know that's a somewhat controversial thing to say, and some people find that quite... But, you know, I understand. People really want to get married. They really enjoy it. I've been told. And I don't want to rain on anyone's parade. And the thing that the reason it's so controversial is because it really is about emotions. But when we're in a situation of inequality, we do have to ask the questions, are you and your feelings that important? Yes and no, right? In examining inequality, those of us with privilege need to confront the idea that maybe we're not the most important thing and that how we feel doesn't really matter that much. That privilege is power and responsibility, and that choice can be exercised radically, and that our discomfort in facing up to these issues is not that important. Often our discomfort is just a way of pushing away responsibility and on placing important things in the too hard basket. It's a kind of social procrastination. And I'm sick of white guilt. It's boring, that whole like, oh God, I don't know, push it away thing. Who cares? Let's suck it up and get on with it. And once we stop caring so much about how we feel, then we can get on to work. There's shit to be done, and our ego value reward system needs a rerouting to include the needs of others. It's hard, but confronting issues head on always results in a better outcome. Now, change is scary and it feels weird. Discomfort is uncomfortable, but not that important. And now I'm going to talk about cows. So I grew up on a beef farm. It was a hobby farm, all right. My parents were middle-class city slicker professionals on a tree change, but we did have cows. Now, cows are stupid. They're idiots. They're total morons. I don't eat beef anymore because I decided I like the feeling of moral superiority more than I like eating animal products, but I never really had that much of a problem with it because cows are idiots. Relatively regularly with cows, you have to move them from one paddock to another. This is what I would say would be the major activity in the industry of cowing, as it's known in the biz. It's not. Just made that up. And this moving between paddocks, with the obvious exception of the last one, is almost always for the benefit of the cow. They want to be in that paddock. It's a better paddock. It's one of the few occasions where the grass is actually greener on the other side. But first you have to get them through the gate. And some people may have worked with cows here, but they don't like that very much. That's all they can see, the discomfort with the squeeze through an unfamiliar, narrow space. And that completely eclipses any sense of what's on the other side. So, if only they could see beyond their own panic to move forward into a new area that will benefit them all. But what can you expect? Cows are idiots. Now, people are not cows, and they're not as stupid, mostly. Although in high school, a scripture teacher did once look me in the eye and say, heaven is a city roughly the size of Sydney. but let's not dwell on that. What I'm saying is the gate and how we feel about it does not matter. Let's not get too focused on the gate and refuse to move into a new paddock. My questions are, how can we change the route of our decision making on a fundamental level? How can we work towards radical empathy? And how can we look at each of the decisions that we make each day, own them and use them to make the world better, and not just for us, because you and I are not that important. Thanks.
I'm interested, Zoe, when you were doing the cowing, professional cowing that you're talking about, do 50% of the cows go in, or do some cows never go through the fence?
Oh, no, I mean, eventually, otherwise, you can get them through.
Like the Mark Latham kind of cows stay there, but all right.
No, it's not really. It's just it's really not based on with a cow. It's not really based on the individual cow so much as just sort of where they are placed in relation to the gate. So they just freak out. Really, it's just a pretty lazy metaphor for talking about how people don't like change and just get scared, but don't really think about the outcomes or the meaning of it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to invite Brad to the podium now. As I said before, Brad is a Western Australian Paralympian, carried the flag in the opening ceremony of the 2016 Rio Paralympics, was telling me that he doesn't normally attend such heavy-handed events, but I think he meant, I don't know if it was heavy-handed as much as heavy duty.
Heavy duty?
Yeah, heavy duty. Well, welcome, Brad.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you to all of you guys for coming out. Bit of a wet and wild day out there, so to actually brave the weather and come here today is very special and important. I'd also just like to thank the traditional owners of the land that we're on here today, the Noongar people. A bit about me, you're probably looking at me going, how's that bloke a Paralympian? Some of you might know who I am, and how does he play wheelchair basketball? And don't worry, sometimes I confuse myself, but I can tell you I actually lost my leg in a work accident about 20 years ago, and it was a weird thing. After I lost my leg, I was a very mad sports person, and I was looking for something to do to try and get back into, I suppose, society in a way. And this old bloke kept ringing up the house saying, come and try wheelchair basketball. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to go and do that. And I have actually not met these ladies up here, and a couple of things that have come to me is, one, I should look at my gender and myself and say, how am I going being the only man on this panel? And it was interesting to hear Sisonke, sorry about that, what she was saying, because we've got very similar questions. And then I was thinking, I've come from a wheat and sheep farm, and I was sort of thinking about going through gates, and then I was thinking it's amazing what we do in our cultures and our societies. I mean, that's why we invented cattle prods. And, I mean, as a society, we've invented probably worse things to deal with people that don't want to go through gates and accept change, whether they want it or not. But, going back to myself and going down and sitting in a wheelchair, and I suppose accepting, my life and what it had become as a person with a disability. And, I took my first push, and I'm going down the court, and some bloke just went straight through me. And I ended up on my back on the ground, and I got up and I thought, that's a bit rough. So I went down there and I went straight through him, and he got up laughing. And I thought, this is a great sport, I'm in. And, you sort of, it was really weird. It was like you leave your leg at the front door and you leave your egos there as well, and you get in and you have a crack. What I didn't realise is, the fact that whether you've got a disability or not, you can play the sport. Whether you're male or female, doesn't matter, you can play the sport. Whether you're old or young, you can play the sport. So it becomes something to me that was very unique. All of a sudden I was participating in something that was open and equal to anyone and everyone that wanted to have a go. So, as fast forward 20 years, I've had a great career. I've been to 5 Paralympics, and every time I go to one, it opens my eyes up even more. From seeing a Chinese dude eat his noodles with his feet because he doesn't have his arms, to blind people running quicker the first, second and third in the 1500 this year, in Rio, were actually quicker than the able-bodied people. You know, at the Rio Olympic Games, you know, I call the Olympic Games a test event for the real games, but anyway, it's one of those things. And, you know, what's happened to me is that I've gone from, I suppose, being, you know, what I'd expect was, you know, people would class as normal to having a disability, and being able to moonlight between the two worlds. And you know, one minute I'm sitting in a wheelchair, next minute I'm standing in front of you guys. And you know, what happened with me was that we actually went and did a test event. It was a wheelchair. It was called the World Wheelchair Basketball Challenge. And I'd actually spoken to a group of Aboriginal kids only a couple of weeks beforehand. And we'd got these young boys to come down and actually help facilitate the day. And we had 300 kids come down there, and the police turned up to put the speed gun on a few people and see how quick they were going to go down the court. One of the policemen pulled me over and said, why are those boys taking money at the front? Who gave them that job? I said, oh, I did. Why, you got a problem with it? And, you know, like, they're doing a great job, these young Aboriginal boys. And he goes, oh, no, it's the first time we've seen them in a positive light. He goes, I was actually only dealing with a couple of them last Thursday. And I was like, oh, that's fine, because my dealings have been nothing but pleasurable. So I actually got something to say. You were saying about an Aboriginal person with difficulties being a woman Aboriginal. I'd like to put something else in there. Imagine being an Aboriginal woman with a disability, and see how life treats you then. And so what came out of this, and my question to the nation is, you know, we talk about foreign aid and everything that we're doing, but, you know, the statistic is 2 out of 3 Indigenous people here in Australia have some form of disability, compared to 1 in 5 Australians, if you want to say, or I should say other Australians, other Australians. And, you know, I see it on a daily basis. You know, I've got friends, one of my friends is the NAIDOC Sports Star of the Year. He's just been named Young West Australian of the Year. He's used wheelchair basketball to get a full ride scholarship to the University of Alabama. And he's in his 4th year, and his degree over there as a young, proud Noongar boy. And, yeah, he's doing some special stuff, but he's got a disability, and I see what he faces on a daily basis. We've now got 8 Indigenous athletes in the organisation that I'm involved in, which is the Outback Academy and the Red Dust Healers. When we started, we had 1 Indigenous athlete, and slowly we're starting to open that door up. And, you know, part of it has been through wheelchair basketball and what we're doing. But, you know, I was a bit disappointed when I heard the government wanted to shut down a lot of the communities up north. And I'm like, that's someone's home. And, you know, that's all they know. And why would you want to take that away from them? So, you know, so what I'm getting at with it is that, you know, what are we as a nation going to do about our own backyard before we do about, you know, deal with other people's issues overseas? So, yes, it's something for you guys to contemplate and to, you know, to think about. And I'm definitely open up for the discussion. But, you know, like I said, 2 in 3 Indigenous people have some form of disability. And here in 2017, I think as a nation, we're probably more racist than we were 15 years ago, in the early 2000s, when I thought we had made some positive strides moving forward. And it seems to be that, you know, between the individual, I suppose, issues that come up and events that do happen, like the Kalgoorlie incident that's going on at the moment, and then throw on top of that, you know, the wars we're having overseas with Islam and what's that doing. And I think we're just getting so caught up in the media and what's being, I suppose, force-fed to us, that we're not really taking a good look ourselves and formulating our own opinion and doing something about it. A lot of people talk the talk, but, you know, like was mentioned before, I don't think a lot of people are actually doing anything about it, and they're happy to sit there on their couches and throw their 2 cents in, but really physically, what are they actually doing? They're not actually getting up off that couch and actually following through on what they're saying. So, you know, I see it firsthand, and I see the difficulties that, you know, people are faced with, young people are faced with, but more so I'm seeing it now with the young Indigenous population and what they're going through. And, you know, I'll just finish on this. this and why I'm sort of here today throwing this question at you. In 1960, our first Paralympic team went to Rome and participated there, and there was a guy called Uncle Kevin Coombs, and he was the first Indigenous person to go and represent Australia at the Paralympics. The problem was he had to go as an honourable Englishman. Now, if you ask me to go and represent Australia as an Englishman, I've got to censor what I'm about to say here. I tell you to go get stuff, but that's me. I'm a very patriotic Australian. But to imagine going and representing your country, but as another nationality, because you're not actually recognised as a person. Fast forward and the reason why I got involved in what I'm doing is because when I talked to those young kids, one of them put their hand up at the end and said, I showed them a video of 2008 Paralympic Games in Beijing, and they said, "Brad, where are all the black fellas?" And I didn't know how to take the question. And then I sort of thought about it, and I was like, I don't think there were any Aboriginal people there. And then I looked into it. We only had one. So what I'm saying is in 40 years of sport and how much of Australians we put pride in our sport as part of our culture, that as a statistic, in 40 years we actually haven't improved. We actually haven't gone forward at all. And I think that correlates a lot with culture and where we're at and how we're dealing with the Aboriginal people at the moment. And the fact that we formally won't recognise them at all just speaks volume in itself. And hopefully in the next few years through our organisation, you will see more Aboriginal athletes with disability competing on the world stage. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brad. Nayuka Gorrie is our final speaker, writer, activist. Check her out on Twitter and also her writing on Junkie Nayuka.
Hi. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Noongar country, and I was talking to my friend Rita. We both spoke on this thing together, and we were like, welcomes are really welcomes or acknowledgements of country are really weird, because it's like you've already invited yourself in, and then you're like, I am here. It's like announcing yourself. I'm in the room. So it's like, I wonder what would happen if we actually, this is not my question, don't take this and say I don't have any more questions. But what would happen if we were actually, like many months ago, if I was like, actually, yo, Noongar people, is it okay if I come? Can I be on your country? I feel like that, the power dynamic, when you're already on someone's country and you're like, I'm in the room and I want to think about the people who own the room for a second. Yeah, that's just something to think about. Or at least I was thinking about it this morning over my wheat flakes and soy milk. So my question for the nation is, can I have 2 more questions? The first question is, should I buy a bunker? So I'm a bit of a pessimist, and I'm the first to admit that. I'm actually writing a book about the apocalypse and why we should lean in to it. I just think, we've got a lot of we're facing increasing economic inequality. Climate change is like a thing that's happening. And we're kind of just like not doing anything about it. We're like, nah, mate, she'll be right. Like, there are like stateside bits of ice melting, just like crumbling. And we're just like, nah, let's dig up more coal. We're real chill about it. And it's really interesting, this is a side note, what this country decides to be real chill about. Like, we're chill about things like climate change or whatever, but the things that actually piss us off is really telling. Anyway, that's an aside. So should I buy a bunker, and how big should it be, and how many people should I let live in the bunker with me? If it's just me and my boyfriend, like, would we get sick of each other? How many cans of chickpeas do I need? Do I get cans or do I get dried chickpeas? Where should the bunker be? I've often thought northern New South Wales would make a good place to hide from zombies or whatever. But seriously, I've been thinking that from what I can observe, the white world is losing is losing its mind a little bit. Voting in Trump was not unexpected, a bit weird, but also a kind of sign of the times of how desperate people are. So yeah, the world is a bit wild and wacky at the moment. And as I said, I'm pessimistic. I'm often, as a black woman, I'm like, this country kind of blows a lot sometimes. It's not very nice to black people. It's not nice to black women. And I'm queer as well. Pride, baby. Yeah. And yeah, it's not particularly nice to queer people and not nice to my trans siblings either. So I'm like, maybe even if it was okay, maybe if the world was okay, I'd probably still opt into a bunker. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe if a bunker with the internet, I think. And so, yeah, I've been like, I just did this thing before and I was feeling real pessimistic about it because just this week we had Elijah Doughty's killers walk free. Well, not walking free, but not found guilty of manslaughter after killing a 14-year-old boy, which is a bit awkward to say the least, I suppose. But apparently that's how justice is done over here. So I've been feeling really just not okay about the world. So, but then doing this panel, and I got to say, like, I was not hopeful doing this panel. I mentioned before I'm pessimistic. And I did think, like, I don't know, I don't expect the best in people, or I expect the worst and then I'm pleasantly surprised, and I feel like that's a safer place to be. So I was feeling, I was just really curious as what today was going to be like and how everyone else was going to be. And I know this is a bit of the ABC Radio National crowd. I know that. So there's a, glimmer of hope there, but I guess I wasn't expecting that the sort of questions that these people were going to be asking were also the questions that I ask. And I think sometimes I forget that I actually have a lot in common with other people. I forget that I'm not, this really unique avant-garde person, that, I haven't got unique thoughts. So whilst on one hand I'm wondering, should I buy a bunker? Should I have children? Should I bring children into this world? The other question I want to ask the nation, and ultimately myself, for my own well-being, is, should we be hopeful? Maybe the world, maybe other people can be good. And maybe I'm just used to seeing shit, that I expect shit. But maybe there are other people out there that give a shit about the same thing you do and maybe want to help you get to where you need to go. So, I don't know, should I buy a bunker or should I be hopeful? Those are my questions for this nation. Thank you.
It's been a big afternoon. I actually didn't even know how you could stand up at the podium after the panel we had before and say a whole new lot of stuff, but a whole lot of same stuff excellently well. Congratulations. Wow. Okay. So, before we get to voting, I suppose the aim of this ongoing project is not only to get your views about some of the questions. So if anybody with a smartphone can download the app now and start to vote. Anybody without a smartphone, semaphore signals or pigeons,
who doesn't have a
putting your hand up. Pardon?
I said, who doesn't have a smartphone?
Quite a few people who don't have a smartphone.
Oh my God!
My father.
Look, there's no smartphone prejudice
what's
here.
What's the name? Amandla, you know that real cool black chick, Amandla Steinberg, yeah, Rue, played Rue. She doesn't have a smartphone. She got a flip phone the other week because she's the real thing on social media, but she's like, no, our generation is like bogged down by the internet and stuff, as I read it on my smartphone, but yeah, there are even the youth are thinking about it. Yeah.
So what I want to make sure this session is, because the questions we're going to be faced with are fairly, let's just say, Guardian, ABC, Radio National type questions. So some pretty obvious questions that we're going to ask, and we've tried to ask them in slightly different ways. But the opportunity to have the kinds of speakers that we've had today is to add to the kinds of questions. And so to go backwards, Nayuka's question is, I can answer one question, dried. Chickpeas, definitely, because they don't take up so much space.
Yeah.
But should she buy a bunker? Should she be hopeful? I suppose, how do we add to that? How do we all work towards an Australia where she doesn't feel like she has to be in a bunker? In terms of Bradley's question, how are we going to address some of the issues around Aboriginality and disability coming together? And we certainly know that the NDIS is not addressing that in any way.
Well, here in Western Australia, we have our own NDIS, which, God, blows me away how we can even let that happen as a country. But anyway, we'll see what the outcomes are.
Zoe's question, which I loved, how can we work towards a radical empathy? I think that was pretty good. The cowing thing, do you mind if I don't have a question about the cowing stuff?
Fine, I was just,
I thought it was a really good metaphor. Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks.
Like the penny dropped and I was like, oh!
I just wanted to know if any of the cows refused to go through the gate.
Just cows.
Those cows die.
Yeah, they're all dead now. Angus.
And Sisonke had a lot of questions, but there was a couple that I really liked. What happens to Australia if Aboriginal people don't forgive and forget on a timeline? And why are we so afraid of Aboriginal anger? And why can't we just sit and listen? So there's lots of questions to add, but now is your opportunity if you've got Slido, but also if you can write it on a note, like I said, pigeon, semaphore signals. So what we're going to do now is go through the 6 questions that the Wheeler Centre has developed with me, questions that face the nation, and we're hoping at the end to have a pretty good idea about how people feel about these questions. They're unfortunately not yes, no, maybe. We're forcing people to make a decision, but part of the panel is also to have a conversation around some of the issues that surround these questions. So, are we ready? We can start with the first one. Next slide. Should there be a citizenship test to buy property in Australia? So that could be farming property or residential property. I should have maybe said that in the 12 years that I've been travelling Australia, sitting in people's living rooms, listening to them talk and doing research on public opinion, these are just some of the questions that come up time and time again that are debated and talked about from different perspectives. So that's the first one. Anybody in the panel have a view about this particular issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, Brad, do you have a view?
Because my mother has an immigration agency. It's a tough one. It's a little bit both ways. And also, I mean, I'm married to an Italian lady, who's been out here in Western Australia, who only now walks on grass because of the fear of snakes. It's amazing that, what comes up with culture and stuff. But the thing with this is that, I mean, a lot of other countries, actually, you need to be a citizen before you can purchase land. And I sort of tend to agree with that. You should be a citizen before you can buy property here. And the reason why I say that is because there's a lot of grants and helping hand to be able to get your first property, and a lot of people do come in and see the loopholes in being able to get around that, and then band together and buy not only one property but buy several, and then don't actually live here. So take that opportunity away from other people that are actually living and contributing every day here. But on saying that, on the other side, I've settled around with a lot of immigrants that are out here, backpackers, etc. They're looking to start a new life here because they don't have the opportunity abroad, and they can't actually get the property, and yet they've been here for a long, long time. But once they go through a 457 and et cetera, et cetera. So they would like to buy a property, but they can't. So it's a difficult one.
Yeah. You can see that the audience is evenly divided, unless only 2 people have downloaded the app, in which case 2 people disagree on the question. But anyway, on to the next question. Is Islamophobia more of a threat to national security than religious extremism?
What
Anyone-
kind of religious extremism?
Good point, Zoe. Is that what when you look at that?
Well, I think religious extremism in general is pretty shit. But
Of all religions?
yeah, I don't think they're great. That's what I have to say on that. I don't think either are good. I think we should get rid of
Which
both
one
of
do you
them.
like better? Which one do you want? One to your head.
You've got to
Zoe.
choose one or the other.
Actually, I think they're connected, really, aren't they? Because Islamophobia is a kind of religious extremism, which is is based on Christianity and is also based on religion. So I think that is the problem with
Clearly,
religion.
one's posed very much as a threat to the nation, whereas the other is seen as a personal choice. I'll go to you.
I think it's well, if we're talking specifically about Islam and extremism there, like, I was going to say I was going to have an opinion, but it would be an opinion, and I don't fucking know. And I actually think this is a problem. Like, we've all got opinions. Like, you can talk to any dickhead. I was living in Fitzroy, like, on a really, I don't know what the equivalent would be here, like your trendy, gentrified, sharehousey, yuppie kind of area. Maybe this is it, actually.
It's right round the corner, yep.
One of those busy streets, and like 3 a.m. on a Friday night, every dickhead's got an opinion. Like, we can all think things, but yeah, it's just interesting what we choose to defer to the experts in and what we're all like, nah. But in saying that, I've got an opinion, and I feel like there's a positive feedback loop there where if you make, people can be driven to particular things, and if we create environments, as a black woman, I'm only a little bit away from like extremism or radicalism. Like it sometimes I feel like I'm ready to snap. That's a joke, ASIO.
Any ASIO people in here, it's a joke.
We are all capable of extremism. This is the thing. This is not some other person. This isn't some other human being. We are all very capable of being extremists. We're all very capable of making other people uncomfortable, and we often do it. And right now, it is Islam's turn. Not that long ago, it was communists. Not that long ago, it was other people. We're prone to hatred. I'm like, we peaked at amoebas. Like, humans peaked at amoebas. It's been downhill since then. I'm being pessimistic again. Yeah, sorry.
Sisonke, yeah.
So I think one of the things that needs unpacking in that question is, what is national security?
Exactly.
So I think clearly individual people's sense of security is important. And where I work at the Center for Stories, we hear lots and lots of stories actually from young women in hijab all the time about how much of an invitation people think it is to be commented on, to have their scarves pulled, to have some kind of view shared about them because they're in hijab. So I think there is a real threat to individual security that Islamophobia brings with it. And it's particular to Islam because of hijab, and it's felt by, obviously, women. But I also think that certain communities are under surveillance, are particularly under threat, again, with a particular, Islamophobic tinge. I think we've had bombings in the city. So I think it's important to think about national security in a wider kind of daily context. And we know how politicians behave, and we know that the notion of, terror is something that's used to mobilize more money and blah, 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 and to rally around fear. So no, I think we've got Islamophobia. We've got a phobia problem.
I'm far more frightened of white supremacy and white supremacists. No, seriously.
Than you are of religious extremism.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I find white extremists frightening. They are fucking scary. And they do damage. This isn't some imaginary thing. Like, they are out there and they are mobilising.
But also, just again, I think there's a difference between organized white supremacist groups, which are scary, frightening, and mobilizing, and, you know, just certainly when I was in university, when I moved to America, the thing that you feared the most at night walking down the street was a group of 5 or 6 white boys, right? That's a fearful thing. And they're rowdy and they're drunk and there are ways in which they behave and public humiliations which they feel comfortable directing at you if you're a black woman. It's just, and in a way that is very different from what a similar age group of black men will be able to do to you. So I think there is something very real about the vulnerability of being a woman walking past a large group, particularly of young white male. There's a permission that the society gives us. They're just having fun.
Boys will be boys.
Yeah.
So to go back to how we can, I mean, I did this question deliberately. We could have very easily said, is domestic violence more of a threat to national security? I suppose it's how we structure national security. Your fear of 5 rowdy white guys probably more based on fact than people's fear necessarily of being personally a victim of religious extremism. Now, this next question goes to Nayuka's question about why should we care about people's opinions. This is something I worry about all the time as somebody who's a professional opinion research on professional opinion, because my husband sometimes will introduce me to his friends as, this is Rebecca. She knows a lot about people who don't know what they're talking about. That's my job, is understanding people who don't know what they're talking about. So the next question is, and this really goes to the heart of the fact that we keep doing poll after poll after poll about how people feel about marriage equality.
No.
So this is the next one. Should the public really have a say about marriage equality?
No.
So I'm going to go to you. Is that you?
Yes.
Oh, yes, tell us.
No.
No, next question, so people will vote?
Next, no. Well, I think it's when things like human rights and like it's why should some dickhead get to say what I do with my life? It's not asking for special treatment. It's not a special different thing. It's just about going, these are human rights. It's like going like, should black people be allowed to go to school? What do you think? Who cares what you think? They should.
Shouldn't.
So to be devil's advocate for a moment here, Zoe, the reality is that most of the research shows that the community are for marriage equality, and the people who aren't, of those people who aren't, only a small percentage really care about it, and the rest are good to know, I don't, you know, whatever. Even though I see what you're saying, is there an extent to which we still need to be able to get the majority across the idea, or not least antagonistic to it, or you don't think it's important?
I don't think ethically and politically it's actually should be the point. I don't think that's what constitutions and what laws and what, you know, what is right and ethical is actually based upon. Sure, it's interesting to know people's opinions and it has like a political kind of, you know, effect, but I don't think that we should need, you know.
Does it make you feel better that 60 to 70% of people are happy with it than 10%?
It doesn't matter. Well, the thing is, it doesn't matter how many percentage of people agree with it. It doesn't make me less queer. It doesn't make me less a human, and it doesn't make me less, like, deserving of rights.
I'm just going to jump in here, though. I think talking about popularity and, like, doesn't it feel good to know that 60% of the population don't think your kind of sex is real gross? And it's not, you know, a lot of it is gross, and I think Tom Ballard has jokes about that. But also, it's really hot. I've not seen you have.
Oh, mine is gross.
But we also need to know that there have been plenty of political decisions that have been made that did not get the approval of the Australian public. When I don't see myself as an Australian, but for the sake of this, I'll say we, the metaphoric we, decided to let go of the White Australia policy in the early 70s with Vietnamese refugees. That was a really unpopular decision, right? People didn't want Vietnamese people here. People didn't even want Jewish people here. And like Jewish people are like pretty white too. So like this unpopular decisions, popularity is not the best measure of how moral something is. And I say this, I don't want to get married. I think I don't strive. I've got many queer friends that want to get married. I personally, it's not for me. I don't want to strive to like heteronormativity or whatever, but like each their own. But this idea that something has to be popular in order to pass is a bit, it just boggles the mind for me, because there have been some really popular ideas that have been really shit in this country. So we shouldn't wait until something's popular, and we shouldn't seek out popular opinion. If it's right, and just bloody do it.
And look, you can see the polling shows that people agree with you. I know that doesn't make a difference to you at all.
I think if the public did have a say about it, we would have marriage equality
tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's because when you look at it, the politicians are usually, sort of Christian Anglican, upper class, white, live in suburbia type scenario. That are probably pigeonholed into that way of upbringing and what they perceive as right and wrong. Whereas I think if you actually let the general public have a say, you'd find that we wouldn't be debating about it because it already would have been passed.
Yeah. So, Sisonke, do you have something to say on this? This is really about, do we need to have this kind of idea of a popular mandate for issues around fundamental rights?
I think this whole issue, listening to the media in the last year has just been such a great example of like politicking. Like Australian politicians are such bickerers. It's crazy. So it's
whingers is another word.
Whingers. Oh my goodness. So it's politicking. This is a non-negotiable. Human rights are human rights. Period. Okay.
So, and look, very strongly, so it doesn't look like there's just two people doing that slide. It seems like a few more people. Now, is a treaty more important than formal recognition of Aboriginal people in our constitution? So, Nayuka, you've actually written about this very cogently, but do you want to talk about it? You said before you weren't that interested.
Yeah, before I was like, I don't want to talk about black stuff, but then now I'm like, I've caught the spirit, so I'll do it. So I wrote a piece for like a youth online-y sort of publication called website thing on the internet called Vice. And I don't support constitutional recognition. Recognition politics or asking to be seen on your own country is a bit weird.
A little bit like the welcome to country.
Yeah, a little
sense.
Yeah, there's nothing I can say right now. We're all in this room right now. It would be the reason I hate it is because kind of like the marriage equality stuff, you're asking the rest of the population to decide where in a room you should sit. So there's probably a few black people here. There are a couple of black Radio National people. The Stan Grant types. No, Gavin. That was a joke. I don't laugh.
She made them all moan. I'm just trying to listen.
So it would be the equivalent, and this is a metaphor I use. We seem to be fond of metaphors up here. Be the equivalent of asking all of you people, all of you non-Indigenous people in the room, where we should sit. And it makes me a bit uncomfortable to leave my fate in the hands of people who are not like me. Or it doesn't affect them. And I'm more in favour of a treaty because I think I'm still sovereign. And I know that can be a hard notion for non-Indigenous Australia to wrap its head around. But when this country was invaded, my ancestors, not that long ago, didn't give up anything. They never said, here's my country, here's my citizenship, I will join you. We have never joined you. This country is an imposition that we are forced to be a part of. And then your constitution, you have this document that in your mind is like made this great nation. And then you're asking us to be a part of it. And for me, for me, it boggles the mind a bit. I'm sovereign. I'm Gunai Kurnai. I'm Gunujamara. Those are my nations. I'm Yorta Yorta. I'm Wiradjuri. Those are the nations I belong to. I am not Australian, so I don't want to be seen in your constitution. I want you to negotiate with me as a sovereign woman. I want you to negotiate with my elders. And that means you have to see us as sovereign, which I know must be like the strangest thing. But that means you accept our framework as opposed to us fitting into a framework that has never worked for us. That's kind of how I feel about it.
And I know you don't like polls, but Nayuka, there you go.
If you can talk to your local members about that and talk to your family and friends, because people think that, and I know you want to do the right thing. Most people want to back the right thing, and they want to go to sleep knowing that they're not the worst people in the world. Not the very worst. So we get behind nice, warm, fuzzy campaigns, and I know constitutional recognition seems to be one of them. But for those of us in the community, and I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I'm going to speak for the state that I'm from, Victoria, we rejected it. We rejected it, and now we're having treaty discussions, and those discussions aren't perfect, but I can say that where I'm from, we reject it. So please have those discussions, and don't just, PR is fluffy and bullshit. Actually have yarns. Thank you.
2 more questions. No, sorry, we're just going through this process. Is the next one, is the Australian dream of home ownership more harmful than helpful? Brad, any view on that? Chloe, aren't you too busy eating smashed avocados or something to kind of buy your own home or something?
Not busy, it's just... It's not like, oh God, I wish I had time to buy a house. Like, it's too expensive. It's insanely expensive. It's prohibitively expensive for people of my generation. So it's sort of, if I feel like self-harming, I just go on realestate.com. Look at Sydney house prices.
Brad and then Sisonke.
I got to live overseas for 12 years. So I was away from Australia for a long time. When I left Perth, housing was pretty affordable. And when I came back 12 years later, I wish I'd never come back. I was actually scared at how I was going to be able to integrate back into what you'd probably call society. It's interesting, the grass is greener in the other paddock. I think the pressure of society of having to own a home and doing what everyone else is doing and what almost like what society places on your shoulders and the burden that comes with home ownership, and the stigma of the fact that you have to have your own home, because if you're renting, heaven forbid, if you're renting a house, what people are going to think about you. Whereas in Europe, where I spent a long time, there's nothing wrong with renting a house. In fact, pretty much everybody does. Italy, a lot of people rent houses and it's perfectly fine, and you're not based on whether you own it or not.
Yeah. And look, it's interesting. I've been doing quite a lot of research on people living with disabilities and their really quite awful experiences in the private rental market. So their inability to be able to work with landlords to be able to get accessible housing and so forth. So this is a kind of a massive challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just not, people with disabilities, it's finding a workplace that's going to accommodate to being able to get in the front door. So it's across everything. But yes, with landlords, they don't want to spend a cent, but they want to take 2 cents back. So yes.
And in fact, we're just getting a real sense that the Australian dream more harmful than helpful. Sisonke, anything on this before we move to our last question?
It just feels like a very first world question. It's interesting.
I think it's also
the idea of buying. I tweeted about this last night. Like, I love avocado. I love smashed avocado. But I feel like, and maybe you feel like this as well. Do you ever feel like being queer, your relationships aren't perceived as like grown up? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's this infantilization, or like you're not a proper couple. And then I feel like home ownership is one of those things. When you're an adult, you're like not a proper adult unless you own a home. Like if you're, it's just one of those things. I don't know. But like the idea of buying something on stolen land, or even having to buy my own country, there's like a weird thing there. But so if any of you lovely white people want to buy me a house, I'm not above it,
Where are you going to put your bunker?
My mum just...
Under the house.
I do genuinely think, I really connected with your bunker thing. Like, not even in like a funny, I'm like,
in an actual way.
Where am I going to go during the apocalypse? Because when, like, even like I'm talking, I think the thing of like the home ownership thing is, if you expand it and look at it, it's like
people are so concerned. People deserve somewhere to live. And, you know, when you talk about in every major city in Australia, there are more and more homeless people, and people are really struggling to find places to live, and it is prohibitively expensive to have a roof over your head. So people want home ownership because of, you know, security, because they're like, where will I go? But also at the same time, what we have is such a commercial, competitive thing, which is
we've
about
always
a
had this
right.
frame of home security as ownership.
Yeah.
So the question is that more harmful than helpful? And the vast majority of people think that is. To the final question, is compulsory voting bad for democracy? Sisonke.
So we don't have compulsory voting in South Africa, and we also have increasing incursions into the state broadcaster. And so the combination of a political arena in which politicians feel that they own the state broadcaster and not compulsory voting has meant year on year the South African people are voting less, and so participation in voting is decreasing, and the quality of politics is also decreasing. So there's definitely a relationship between people not voting and getting terrible leaders. So I really like the fact that there is compulsory voting in this country. I think it's really important that people see it as an obligation of being able to benefit from the state, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think compulsory voting is a good thing for non-Indigenous people. And then I think...
Sorry, keep going. Yep.
Yeah, and then I think for Indigenous people, if we're going to talk about treaty and if we're going to talk about self-governance and a whole range of other things which are important, because flowing through this and all these questions, I'm like, citizenship and owning property. Buying a home, the Australian dream. Like, so much of what defines Australia is predicated on all of these things where I'm like, as a black person who comes from a place where we are the majority, it's so interesting to me what happens when you're not in the majority, when you're such a small minority. It's like so many questions and conversations that I make assumptions that we control in South Africa. Black people don't control that conversation. And so there's this silence. There's this assumption that you can talk about citizenship and people getting a right to buy land when I'm like, none of y'all are real citizens here. Like, why are we even having that conversation? You know?
Yeah, I mean, all of the questions are kind of have this kind of extraordinary kind of tight frame. And these are this is how so much of the conversations I've listened to in my life, because it's been mainly migrant Australians, but white Australians have kind of approached social and political institutions through the concept of property ownership. It's such a kind of controlling frame. Brad, is compulsory voting bad for democracy?
No, I have to agree. I think that the more people that, it's interesting. You want to move forward as a collective whole. But if you don't have people actually taking that small amount of time to actually go and do something physical, like I said before, it's easy to have your opinions while you're sitting on the couch, but you actually got to get off the couch and go do something about it. So if you're not willing to be able to get up and go and do that, then I think we've got a problem there if we believe that we can actually move forward as a collective group and start getting things done that we believe that need to happen.
Similar, like, I don't think it's weird to have to vote for a nation that you're just like, see as illegitimate. That's a bit of a weird thing. And it's like, oh, you got to do it or you'll get a fine. And I'm vegan, so I can't even fucking eat the sausages. Anyway.
There's no fun in any part of it.
I know. I'm such a fucking party pooper. Sorry, guys. I think, we see what happens when it's not compulsory. I'm going to say we as in, like, settler Australia, you. We see what happens when it's not compulsory. In America, it's not compulsory, and then it's done on days where, working class people can't attend. And only, there are particular kinds of people who vote. So there is the danger of that when it's not compulsory, but also the idea of democracy. There's something that's meant to be inherently about freedom in democracy, and when you make something compulsory, it's like defeats its own purpose there. So I feel like breeding civic pride and civic duty is probably like the longer game than making someone do something. That's a whole bunch of opinions. Because I'm like, oh, whatever, you, White Australia, do White Australia, I don't care, whatever. Just as long as it doesn't affect me, just whatever. So I'm ambivalent, but also I think people should engage in politics and be passionate and do things. And if one of those things is voting, then whatever, sure.
Yeah.
Zoe.
I agree. I think that the major thing, just Brexit and Trump, is what happens when it's not there. And I don't think it's perfect, but I do think that I'm so glad that we have compulsory voting, because I think that when you don't, then there is an impetus for politicians to intentionally disenfranchise working class people, young people, etc. So,
we still have people in this country who don't vote. Like, if you're in prison, right, then you're not voting. And most, disproportionately affected by that are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So it's not as though we say, compulsory voting, but we're only, once again, there are outliers when we talk about that.
So just a question. So we talk about Trump and Brexit a lot. Are we ready to collapse those two terms into Trexit, or do you think? Ready? Brump. Did you start doing that?
Lovely lady.
Too much effort to talk about the two things together. What we've got here, it's interesting to look. We had some really divided issues, but on this, compulsory voting, bad for democracy, very much a sense in the room that it's a big part of what we see.
all the people who were going to vote yes decided not to vote.
Because they were too busy. Well, there was no sausages. We weren't offering any, not even vegan sausages with smashed avocado, which sounds great, actually. I think we might be almost ready for the end, but after the conversations that we've had and for the panel listening to everybody else, I wonder if there's any final comments from the panel.
Oh, that's us.
Yes, that's you. I know you've worked very hard.
And you're looking to the crowd, and I was just waiting for you to react.
I was waiting for a question from
Brad, any final thoughts?
No, my thoughts are, it's 2017 and I think we've procrastinated enough on a number of issues, and I think it's now more time about actually doing some stuff. And when I say, I don't mean coming together and going on a march or, a rally. I mean actually individually doing something, whether it's small or large, it doesn't matter, but actually start contributing physically to society in a way that's going to make us achieve what we want to achieve.
Sisonke.
Yeah, I think it was funny you were talking about Trump, and I was thinking if America is post-truth, then what I hope as these conversations take place in this country about treaty and recognition versus recognition, I hope that Australia cannot be post-guilt. I would hate for guilt to die. I think white guilt is boring, but I also think guilt and having a sense of shame can be powerful propellers for progress. And so I hope we don't get to a place where this country is post-guilt, because I think that's bad.
Zoe?
I think, I guess just on both of those things of I'd really like to see people, I think it can be very confusing for people going I don't know what I can do. And I think it's about looking at what we're already doing and the decisions that we make every day, and big ones and small ones, and actually looking at how our everyday actions affect the political world that we're in and affect other people in terms of the language that we use, the way that we gender people, the relationships that we have, the way that we relate to other people, and the food that we eat, where we're getting things from. We're constantly making those things. And I think sometimes, I think that would be my thing of really looking at those as very much connected to politics.
And Nayuka?
I just think it's good to ask questions. I really like questions because there's something innately humble about them, not knowing what the answer might be. I think questions are a really good thing to do, asking people what they truly think, and ask children what they think, and ask older people what they think, I think sometimes, from what I can observe, White Australia, if you'll allow me, I think sometimes you're afraid to have tough conversations, and you're afraid of being awkward. Actually, no, I think that's a human thing. We're all a bit afraid to be awkward. So just like if you're having a dinner thing, I don't know what you do on a Friday night at 5 p.m.
Wine,
you know.
Pinot Noir and Game of Thrones, that's what white people tend to do.
Oh no, we do that too. We do that too.
Shit, I'm white.
Like, just, you know, have the chats. Like, we see this stuff on the news or it's in our news feeds, and it's really, I just, like, sometimes I'll randomly ask my grandfather something about something, you know, it might be queer stuff, and I'm genuinely surprised sometimes by what comes out of his mouth, because he, as you might have noticed, I assume the worst, and he'll just say something that, you know, really surprises me. So we need to actually talk, and not just to our, you know, our own little bubble, but, you know, talk to people in an electorate that you are not from. Yeah, I think talking is really good, and asking questions is really good.
Can everybody thank our extraordinary panel? Nayuka, Zoe, Brad and Sisonke. And thank you for everybody who downloaded the app and voted, and have a lovely afternoon.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.